What is your school bus horror story? I was waiting at the bus stop for my 7-year-old son Noah, who has autism and is mostly nonverbal. The bus was 45 minutes late. When it finally pulled up, only Noah was on it, alone in the back, crying and soaked in urine because he'd been on the bus for 2 hours. The driver, Carl, opened the doors and said, "Your kid peed himself," as his mother deal with it. I ran onto the bus to get Noah, who was shaking and too terrified to even move, when I heard Carl on his phone with another driver. Carl was saying loudly, "Yeah, I left the R word on the bus alone for 2 hours while I ran errands. Kid peed himself after hour 1, but that's not my problem. Should have seen him crying like a baby. Hilarious. Can't even tell anyone because he can't talk." He saw me listening and smiled. "What? It's true. Besides, one less defect wouldn't be the worst thing. Maybe I should have left him at Walmart parking lot, see if anyone would even care." Noah was rocking violently, understanding every cruel word. Carl continued into his phone. His mom babies him. The kid belongs in an institution, not a regular school. I've been thinking about driving him there myself, dropping him at the state facility. Who'd stop me? He can't say where he's going. I screamed, "You left my baby alone?" Carl shrugged. Still breathing, isn't he? Though honestly, these kids shouldn't even be born. Waste of resources. My hands were shaking with rage as I tried to comfort Noah, who was now having a full meltdown, hitting his head repeatedly. I pulled out my phone to call 911. Carl laughed. "Go ahead. Call. It's my word against an R word who can't speak. Who's gonna believe you? Besides, I've got friends at the district. Been driving for 20 years. As I dialed, I also started recording video of Noah's state, his soaked pants, his distress, his injuries from hitting himself. Carl didn't notice, still on his phone bragging, "Remember that autistic kid last year who fell off my bus? This one's worse." I called my husband on speaker while still recording. "Nathaniel, Carl left Noah alone on the bus for 2 hours. Nathaniel's voice exploded through the speaker. "What? I'm calling the police and the news. I'm 5 minutes away." Carl grabbed for my phone, but I pulled back. "Don't touch me or I'll add assault to the charges." He sneered. "Charges? You think anyone cares about your broken kid? The district protects me. I've gotten away with worse." "Like what?" I asked, still recording. Carl was too angry to notice. "Like that Down syndrome kid I forgot at school 3 times. Or the wheelchair kid I made sit in his own crap because I didn't want to deal with him. Nobody believes the defects." Noah suddenly made a sound, not a word, but a clear vocalization of distress. He pointed at Carl and signed BAD, one of his only signs, then signed HURT. Carl's face changed. "He's communicating?" "He understands everything," I said. "He just can't speak. And I've recorded everything you just said." Carl lunged for my phone, but I'd already sent the video to my husband, my sister, and uploaded it to cloud storage. Too late. The bus radio crackled. "Carl, this is dispatch. We've been monitoring your GPS all day. You went to Walmart for 45 minutes, McDonald's for 30, and home for 20 minutes. With a child on board. The superintendent is on his way." Carl went pale. "You can't prove the kid was on the bus." But then Noah did something extraordinary. He pulled out his communication device, the tablet he uses at school, and typed slowly, "Scared, alone, wet, Carl bad." "He's been documenting," I whispered, looking at the tablet's history. Time-stamped entries, bus hot, need bathroom, scared, where mommy, 2 hours of entries. Nathaniel's truck screeched into the parking lot. He ran onto the bus, saw Noah's state, and grabbed Carl by the shirt. "You tortured my son?" Carl tried to pull away. "Get off me. He's just a child," Nathaniel roared. But I pulled him back. "Don't. He's not worth assault charges. We have everything we need." Police sirens were approaching. Carl tried to exit the bus, but Nathaniel blocked him. "You're not going anywhere until police arrive." Carl got desperate. "Listen, I'll quit. I'll leave town. Just don't what?" I asked. "Don't let everyone know you torture disabled children?" Too late. I showed him my phone. Live stream to the school's Facebook parent group. 300 parents watching. The police arrived with the superintendent and a CPS worker. The officer looked at Noah, still in soaked clothes, still distressed, with visible marks from hitting himself. "How long was he alone?" 2 hours, I said, showing the GPS records dispatch had sent. While Carl shopped and went home. The superintendent was watching the video on my phone, his face growing darker with each word. When he heard Carl say, "One less defect wouldn't be the worst thing," his whole body went stiff and he dropped my phone like it burned him. He pulled out his own phone and started dialing while staring at Carl with this look I'd never seen on an administrator before. "This is an emergency," he said into his phone. "I need the entire board here now." The police officer was already moving toward Carl with handcuffs while more parents started pulling into the parking lot. I saw at least 10 cars arriving all at once and people getting out with their phones recording everything. The officer read Carl his rights while Carl kept yelling that this was all a misunderstanding. I wrapped my jacket around Noah, who was still shaking, and lifted him up even though he's getting heavy for me. Nathaniel helped me carry him to the truck while the CPS worker followed right behind us. "I need to document his injuries tonight," she said while pulling out her phone. "I'm calling ahead to have a pediatric nurse ready at the hospital." Noah buried his face in my shoulder and wouldn't look at anyone. The drive to the emergency room felt like forever, even though it's only 10 minutes away. Nathaniel kept reaching back to touch Noah's leg while I held him in the back seat. The CPS worker followed us in her car and was on her phone the whole time. When we got there, 2 nurses were already waiting with a wheelchair, but Noah wouldn't let go of me. They had to examine him while I held him on my lap. The nurses took pictures of the red marks on his wrists where he'd been hitting himself and documented how his clothes were soaked through. Noah kept signing home over and over with his one free hand. They checked his vitals and the nurse's face got worried when she saw the numbers. The pediatrician came in within minutes and looked at the blood pressure reading twice. "This is dangerously high for a 7-year-old, she said. She ordered blood work and a urine test to check for dehydration and stress hormones. This kind of prolonged terror can cause lasting trauma in any child, but especially one with autism who already has trouble processing stress. Noah finally let them put in an IV for fluids, but only if I sang his favorite song the whole time. Nathaniel couldn't sit still and went out to the hallway to call his brother, who's a lawyer in the next state. I could hear him through the door describing everything that happened. His brother's voice was loud enough that I heard him say, "We needed to document every medical bill and keep all receipts starting right now." About an hour later, 3 moms from the Facebook group showed up at the hospital. They found us in the pediatric wing and one of them had tears in her eyes. "We saw your video," she said. "Carl did the same thing to our kids." One mom showed me text messages from last year when Carl left her daughter with Down syndrome at the wrong bus stop on purpose. The girl had wandered into traffic before someone found her. "The district said there was no proof Carl did it intentionally," she told me. Another mom said Carl had locked her autistic son in the bus storage compartment for 20 minutes as punishment for stimming too loudly. They'd all filed complaints, but nothing ever happened. The CPS worker came back around 9 p.m. after Noah had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion. She needed to interview me about our home routines and safety plans. She asked about door locks and supervision, and whether we had any weapons in the house. My stomach turned when I realized she was checking if we were fit parents. She saw my face and said it was just protocol, but it still made me feel sick. She asked if Noah had ever been left alone before, or if there were any previous injuries. I showed her his medical records on my phone, proving every mark was from today. She took notes for an hour while Noah slept curled up against me on the hospital bed. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from the superintendent asking if we could meet tomorrow about resolving this situation quietly. Nathaniel was reading over my shoulder and grabbed the phone to forward it to his brother immediately. His brother texted back saying not to respond and to save everything. We finally got discharged at 2 in the morning with a stack of papers and follow-up appointments. Noah wouldn't walk and Nathaniel had to carry him to the car. When we got home, Noah wouldn't go to his own bed. He wedged himself between us and held onto both of us with his hands. Even in his sleep, he kept typing on his communication device. I looked at the screen and saw BUSBAD typed over and over. Around 4 a.m., he typed CARLHURTME without even waking up. Nathaniel and I just laid there watching him breathe and trying not to cry. The next morning, Noah woke up when he heard a truck outside that sounded like a bus. He ran to the kitchen and hid under the table, covering his ears and rocking. I tried to get him to eat breakfast, but he wouldn't come out. Nathaniel called his boss to say he couldn't come in because Noah was grabbing his legs every time he tried to walk to the door. His boss wasn't happy, but Nathaniel said he didn't care. Noah spent the whole morning under that table with his tablet, refusing to eat or drink anything. My phone started ringing while I was on my knees trying to coax Noah out with his favorite crackers. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway because it might be the school or hospital calling back. A woman's voice introduced herself as a reporter from Channel 7 and said she'd seen the Facebook video that now had over 10,000 shares. She asked if I could provide a statement about what happened, but I told her we were just trying to focus on getting Noah through this right now. She said 3 other families had already contacted the station with their own stories about Carl, and they were planning to run a segment tomorrow night whether we participated or not. I hung up and immediately called Nathaniel's brother to ask what we should do about media coverage, but before he could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a suit holding a briefcase and clipboard standing next to the superintendent. I opened the door but kept the chain on while the man introduced himself as the district's legal counsel and said he had an urgent matter to discuss regarding Noah's transportation needs. Nathaniel came to the door behind me and asked what they wanted. The lawyer pulled out a thick document and said the district was prepared to provide Noah with door-to-door transportation in a special vehicle with a dedicated aide if we would sign this agreement today. Nathaniel took the papers through the crack in the door and started reading while I watched Noah still hiding under the table. The lawyer kept talking about how this was a generous offer that would ensure Noah's safety and comfort going forward. Nathaniel got to page 3 where it said, "We would agree not to pursue any legal action against the district, Carl, or any employees, and that we would remove all social media posts about the incident." He looked the lawyer straight in the eye and tore the entire document in half, then in half again, letting the pieces fall at the man's feet. The superintendent started to say something, but Nathaniel cut him off and said we were getting our own attorney and slammed the door. Within an hour, Nathaniel's brother had set up an appointment with Sabina Conti, a special education attorney who'd won several cases against school districts in our state. We had to bring Noah with us because he wouldn't let go of my arm, so 2 days later we drove to her office in the city. Noah brought his tablet and a bag of blocks he uses for calming himself. Sabina's office had a small play area in the corner, where Noah immediately sat down and started stacking his blocks in perfect lines while we talked. She listened to our whole story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally glancing over at Noah, who was completely absorbed in his blocks. When we finished, she pulled out her laptop and started typing formal complaints to the state education department and the Office for Civil Rights, right there, while we watched. She explained each violation Carl and the district had committed, from abandoning a child to violating Noah's rights under federal disability law. She printed everything out and had us sign the complaints before we left, promising to file them electronically that afternoon. The next morning, the police detective assigned to our case called to tell us Carl had posted his $20,000 bail, and the bus drivers' union was paying for his defense attorney. He warned us that Carl had been seen at the local diner telling anyone who would listen that we were drama parents trying to get money from the district because we couldn't handle our kids' issues. The detective said he couldn't stop Carl from talking, but suggested we document any contact or harassment. 3 days after that, we had Noah's first appointment with a trauma therapist who specialized in children with autism. Noah stood frozen in the hallway outside her office, refusing to enter even though I showed him it was safe by walking in and out myself several times. The therapist came out and sat on the floor in the hallway, not looking directly at Noah but playing with some sensory toys she'd brought. After 20 minutes, Noah finally followed her into the office, but only if I stayed right next to him. She worked with him using play therapy while explaining to me that his trust in adults outside his family had been completely destroyed. She said recovery could take months or even years depending on how the legal process played out and whether he had to testify or face Carl again. The following week, the school called an emergency IEP meeting to discuss Noah's educational needs and transportation. When we arrived with Sabina, we found 5 district administrators already seated at the conference table, along with a representative from the bus drivers' union. They started talking about alternative transportation arrangements and modified schedules, but wouldn't acknowledge any wrongdoing or even mention Carl's name. Sabina pulled out her laptop and connected it to the room's TV screen, then played the audio from Noah's communication device from that day on the bus. His entries played through the speakers. Where mommy at 2:47 p.m., where mommy at 2:52 p.m., scared at 3:01 p.m., need bathroom at 3:15 p.m., over and over for 2 hours. The union rep interrupted to claim the device could be manipulated and questioned whether Noah really understood what was happening or if we had coached him. Sabina calmly pulled up Carl's GPS records that the detective had subpoenaed, showing he'd stopped at Murphy's bar for 35 minutes during his route with Noah on board. The administrators all looked at each other while the union rep demanded to know how we'd obtained that information and whether it was even legal to use. 3 days after that meeting, I was doing laundry when Nathaniel came storming into the house after getting a call from another parent. Apparently, Carl had been reassigned to a different bus route on the other side of town and was still driving children while the investigation continued. Nathaniel immediately called the superintendent's home number that we'd gotten during the initial incident. I could hear him shouting from the garage where he'd gone to avoid scaring Noah, yelling about child endangerment and criminal negligence. The superintendent kept saying his hands were tied by union rules and due process requirements. The next day, the Facebook parent group administrator called to tell me they were organizing a protest at the upcoming school board meeting. She said over 50 families had already committed to attending, many with special needs children who'd had problems with bus drivers that were never addressed. They planned to fill the public comment period with their stories and had already contacted local media to ensure coverage. The board meeting room was packed with angry parents holding signs when we arrived that Tuesday night. Noah clung to Nathaniel's hand while I carried his communication device and the printed copies of his entries from that day. The board members sat behind their long table looking uncomfortable as parent after parent filled the public comment sign-up sheet. When they called my name, I walked to the podium with shaking hands and opened Noah's device to the entries from that awful day. Bus hot at 2:15 p.m. appeared on the screen as I read it out loud. Need bathroom at 2:47 p.m. made several board members shift in their seats. Where mommy repeated 12 times between 3 and 4 p.m. had one board member wiping her eyes. The union president sat in the front row shaking his head and muttering something to the person next to him. I kept reading Noah's desperate messages while he rocked in Nathaniel's arms, covering his ears. After me, a woman named Venetia Corona took the podium and pulled out a thick folder. She told everyone how Carl had called her autistic son worthless and stupid last year. The superintendent immediately said he had no record of any complaint from her. Venetia pulled out printed emails she'd sent to him personally, dated 8 months ago, describing Carl's behavior. She held them up for everyone to see, showing the superintendent's own email address as the recipient. The room erupted in angry murmurs as parents realized the district had been hiding complaints. The superintendent's face turned red as he claimed those emails must have gone to spam. 3 hours of testimony followed, parent after parent sharing stories about Carl and other drivers. The local news crew filmed everything while the board members looked more and more uncomfortable. The next morning, nothing had changed according to the district's morning announcement. But at 6 p.m. that evening, after the news ran our story with Noah's tearful face on screen, everything shifted. The district sent out an emergency email saying Carl was now on unpaid leave pending investigation. They claimed it was part of their standard process and had nothing to do with media coverage. Nathaniel threw his phone across the room when he read their lies about following protocol. That same night, Noah woke up screaming, no bus, for the first time. He was soaked in sweat and hitting himself in the head repeatedly. We couldn't calm him down for over an hour, and he wouldn't let go of my arm even to use the bathroom. The next night it happened again, and the night after that. Our pediatrician saw us on emergency basis after the 4th night of screaming. She examined Noah and said his blood pressure was elevated, and he was showing clear signs of PTSD. She prescribed a mild anxiety medication and recommended increasing his therapy sessions immediately. She also wrote a letter documenting that Noah's regression was directly related to the bus incident. 2 days later, Sabina called to warn us that Carl's lawyer had filed something. The defamation lawsuit arrived by certified mail that afternoon, claiming I had destroyed Carl's reputation with false accusations. Carl was seeking $50,000 in damages for the Facebook video I'd posted. Sabina came over that evening and actually laughed when she read the lawsuit. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, she explained. and we had video evidence of everything Carl said. She said this was just an intimidation tactic and she'd handle it easily. The following week, an investigator from the state education department showed up at our door. She interviewed us for 3 straight hours, going through 2 years of transportation records. She showed us complaint after complaint from other parents that had been filed but never investigated. The district had been marking them all as resolved without taking any action. She took copies of Noah's medical records, his device data, and all our videos. She said the state was considering pulling the district's transportation funding if they found systematic neglect. Nathaniel's boss started making comments the next week about all his missed days. Nathaniel had been driving Noah to the school every morning because Noah couldn't handle any bus. His boss pulled him aside and suggested that maybe Noah would be better served at a special institution. Nathaniel told me he almost punched the man, but instead just walked out of the office. He came home early that day and spent an hour on the phone with HR about discrimination. 3 weeks after the incident, we found the first anonymous letter in our mailbox. It called us attention seekers and said we were ruining a good man's life. The second letter came 2 days later with worse language that I won't repeat. The third letter included a photo of our house with liars written across it in red marker. We took all 3 letters to the police station immediately. The officer said they'd increase patrols but couldn't do much without identifying who sent them. During Noah's therapy sessions, his therapist worked on new coping strategies for his bus anxiety. She taught him breathing exercises and gave him a special stuffed animal to squeeze when scared. But every time we passed a school bus on the road, Noah would freeze completely and start hitting himself. We had to plan new routes to everywhere, avoiding all the schools and bus routes. Our 10-minute drive to the grocery store became 50 minutes of back roads. Noah couldn't even look at pictures of buses without panicking. One afternoon, a man named Emilio Estrada called and said he'd heard about our situation. His diabetic daughter had been left on Carl's bus without her insulin last year. She'd gone into medical distress and Carl had told her to stop being dramatic. Emilio had been documenting everything for a year, but was afraid to come forward alone. He offered to testify and share all his documentation with our lawyer. The next morning, the union filed a grievance claiming the district had violated privacy laws by accessing Carl's GPS data without his consent. Their lawyer showed up at our house with papers demanding all evidence be thrown out and Carl be reinstated immediately with full back pay. The union rep stood on our porch telling us they'd been protecting drivers for 30 years and wouldn't stop now. He didn't mention Noah once or ask how he was doing. Sabina called within an hour and told us not to worry because GPS tracking was standard procedure for all district vehicles. She filed a counter motion that afternoon showing Carl had signed the vehicle monitoring agreement 3 times in his employment file. That night was one of the worst we'd had since the incident. Noah woke up screaming around 2 in the morning, and when I went to comfort him, he was typing frantically on his device. The screen showed, "Carl hurt other kids too?" over and over again. I realized he'd been listening when Carl was on the phone bragging about other victims. Noah understood there were more kids like him who'd been hurt. He kept typing, "Where are they?" and "Are they okay?" until his fingers were cramping. I held him while he cried and tried to explain that we were helping those other families now too. Nathaniel found me sobbing in the hallway after Noah finally fell back asleep, because seeing him worry about other kids while dealing with his own trauma was too much. 2 days later, the district's lawyer came to our house with a settlement offer. They'd pay $50,000 for Noah's therapy and medical costs if we signed a non-disclosure agreement. The paperwork was 40 pages long and basically said we could never talk about what happened publicly again. We couldn't post on social media or talk to other parents or the media. Sabina reviewed it that afternoon and immediately told us to reject it. She explained that taking the money would mean we couldn't help other families or push for real changes in the district. The NDA would also prevent us from testifying if other families sued. She said $50,000 might seem like a lot, but Noah would need therapy for years, and this wouldn't even cover half of it. Nathaniel wanted to throw the offer in their faces, but Sabina said we should counter with our own demands, including policy changes, and no NDA. The local news ran an investigation that week that made us sick to our stomachs. The reporter had tracked Carl's employment history and found he'd worked in 3 different districts over 10 years. Each time he left, there were sealed complaints about mistreating special needs children. One district paid a family $20,000 after Carl left their autistic son at the wrong school. Another district quietly transferred him after parents complained he was verbally abusing kids. The third district had 3 separate incidents, but each was settled with confidentiality agreements. The reporter couldn't get the families to talk on camera because of the NDAS, but she had the court filing numbers showing the pattern. Carl had been hurting kids for a decade and just kept getting moved around like some sick game of musical chairs. The district attorney called us the following week to discuss the criminal case. She said the trial date was set for 3 months out, but warned us Carl would probably get a plea deal. She explained that without physical injury to Noah, child endangerment cases rarely resulted in actual jail time. The best we could hope for was probation and maybe some community service. She said Carl's lawyer was already negotiating and would probably get it down to a misdemeanor. Nathaniel punched a hole in our garage wall after that call. I found him sitting on the floor crying because Carl was going to walk free after what he did to our baby. Noah's special education teacher requested a meeting with us that month. She showed us his progress reports from before the incident and compared them to now. He'd been making steady progress with his communication and was starting to participate in group activities. Now he was back to where he'd been 2 years ago. He wouldn't join circle time anymore and had started hitting himself whenever he got frustrated, something we'd worked so hard to stop. She said he'd had 3 meltdowns that week alone when other kids tried to include him in activities. The occupational therapist reported similar regression with his fine motor skills, because his hands were shaking too much to practice writing. His speech therapist said he'd stopped trying to make sounds at all and would only use his device. We signed up for a support group for families dealing with school trauma after Sabina suggested it might help to meet other parents going through similar situations. The first meeting was in a church basement, and there were 8 other families there. Within 10 minutes, we realized 4 of them had Carl's stories. One father completely broke down describing how Carl had made his nonverbal daughter sit in her own vomit for an hour because he didn't want to deal with it. Another mother said Carl had dropped her son with Down syndrome at a gas station and driven away, claiming he thought it was the kid's stop. A grandmother talked about her autistic grandson coming home with bruises that Carl said were from the seatbelt. Every story was worse than the last, and none of them had been properly investigated. The school board finally held a vote on new safety policies after weeks of public pressure. They approved mandatory cameras on all buses and aid requirements for special needs routes. But then they announced budget constraints meant full implementation would take 2 years. They'd start with just 10 buses next semester and slowly add more. Parents in the audience started shouting about their kids' safety not being worth the money. One board member actually said maybe families with special needs, kids should provide their own transportation if they weren't happy with the timeline. Nathaniel had to physically hold me back from rushing the podium. 3 weeks into the restraining order, I was taking Noah to his therapy appointment when I saw Carl's truck in the parking lot. My whole body went cold and I immediately locked the car doors. Noah saw him too and started screaming and hitting his head. I called 911 while trying to calm Noah down, but he was in full panic mode. The therapy building's security footage later showed Carl had been sitting there for over an hour, just watching families come and go. When the police arrived, Carl claimed it was a coincidence and he was just getting coffee at the shop next door. But the coffee shop had cameras too, showing he never went inside. They arrested him for violating the protective order and he spent 1 night in jail before making bail again. The stress was destroying our family in ways we hadn't expected. Noah needed someone awake with him through his nightmares, so Nathaniel and I started taking shifts sleeping. I'd stay up until 3 in the morning, and then Nathaniel would take over until 7. We were both exhausted all the time, and started fighting about stupid things like who forgot to buy milk, or whose turn it was to do laundry. One night, Nathaniel snapped at me for leaving a dish in the sink, and I started crying uncontrollably. We stood in our kitchen at 4 in the morning, both sobbing from exhaustion while Noah slept fitfully on the couch because he couldn't be alone in his room anymore. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courtroom for Carl's preliminary hearing, while my mom watched Noah at home. Carl's lawyer stood up and started arguing that Noah couldn't be a reliable witness because of his autism. The judge cut him off and said Noah's device entries were clear evidence that he understood everything that happened. Carl sat there in his suit looking smaller than I remembered while his lawyer kept trying different angles. The judge finally said the case would move forward to trial and set a date for 3 months out. Outside the courthouse, about 20 bus drivers were holding signs saying Carl was railroaded by helicopter parents. But there were at least 60 families there supporting us, holding pictures of their special needs kids. Some of the drivers looked uncomfortable when they saw all the parents and started leaving early. The local news filmed everything and interviewed parents about their own experiences with unsafe buses. That same week, Noah had a huge breakthrough in therapy when he typed a whole paragraph on his device about feeling scared but safe with mommy and daddy now. His therapist showed us the message and said this was major progress in processing what happened. Noah was starting to use more words on his device and even trying some new signs. We celebrated with his favorite chicken nuggets, and he actually smiled when Nathaniel did his silly dance. Sabina called the next morning to tell us she was filing a federal lawsuit against the district for discrimination against disabled students. She said it could force real change across the whole state, but warned it might take years to work through the courts. The paperwork was thick as a phone book and listed dozens of violations going back 5 years. She'd found patterns of disabled kids being left on buses, denied services, and ignored when parents complained. 2 days later, the DA called to say 2 more families had agreed to testify about Carl. One was Venetia, whose son had been left at the school 3 times, and another was Emilio, whose daughter Carl had dropped at a gas station. The DA said this made the criminal case much stronger, though she still didn't think Carl would get jail time for a first offense. She explained that child endangerment without physical injury rarely resulted in prison. We were disappointed, but at least Carl would have a criminal record and couldn't work with kids again. 4 months after everything started, Noah rode in the car without panicking when we passed a school bus for the first time. Nathaniel and I looked at each other and decided to celebrate with ice cream even though it was only 10 in the morning. Noah picked chocolate and actually smiled when the worker gave him extra sprinkles. It felt like such a small thing, but we'd been working toward it for months with his therapist. Every week we'd practiced getting closer to buses in parking lots and looking at pictures of buses. 2 weeks before the criminal trial, Carl's lawyer called Sabina to say Carl would plead no contest to avoid trial. He got 2 years probation and mandatory counseling, but no jail time, which felt like such a hollow victory after everything Noah went through. The judge banned him from working with children and ordered him to pay $5,000 in fines. Carl never even looked at us during the hearing and left immediately after. We wanted more, but at least it was on his record forever. The district's lawyers contacted Sabina about settling our civil suit the same week Carl took his plea. After 3 days of negotiations, they agreed to $200,000 for Noah's therapy and future education needs. More important than the money, they agreed to put cameras on all buses within 6 months and hire aides for special needs routes. They also had to do quarterly safety audits and report to the state. The new transportation director they hired called us personally to apologize and walked us through all the changes they were making. She'd worked in special education for 20 years and actually understood autism and seemed to really care about keeping kids safe. She implemented mandatory training for all drivers on working with special needs children and created a hotline for parents to report problems directly to her. She met with us 3 times to understand Noah's specific needs and fears. 6 months after that terrible day, Noah agreed to try riding a specially equipped smaller bus with a trained aide for a test run. The aide's name was Ruben, and he'd worked with autistic kids for years and knew sign language. Noah only lasted 10 minutes before signing he wanted off, but those 10 minutes were huge. He'd gotten on the bus voluntarily and sat in a seat without crying. Ruben said Noah did amazing for a first try till they'd work up slowly. We stood in the driveway watching the bus pull away for those 10 minutes, and I cried the whole time. Nathaniel held my hand and said Noah was the bravest kid he knew. That night, Noah typed on his device that the new bus was okay, and Ruben was nice. He even asked if he could try again next week for 11 minutes. We said yes and hugged him tight. The school agreed to keep driving Noah for now while he worked with Ruben to get comfortable. Every week, they'd add another minute to his practice rides. The phone started ringing constantly after our story hit the news. Sabina called one morning to say 3 school districts wanted her help fixing their bus policies before something bad happened to their kids. She set up meetings with their boards, and I went along to show Noah's device entries from that day. The superintendent from one district actually cried when she saw the timestamps. They voted that same night to put cameras on every special needs bus. 2 months later, Nathaniel and I were packing for the state capitol because they wanted us to testify about something they were calling Noah's Law. My mom drove up to watch Noah while we were gone. The hearing room was packed with other parents holding pictures of their kids. I read Noah's device messages into the microphone while Nathaniel held up printed screenshots. The state senator running the meeting had to call a recess when several people started crying. We watched from our hotel room as they voted unanimously to require cameras and trained aides on all buses carrying special needs kids. Noah was eating goldfish crackers on my mom's lap when they announced it on the news. He typed good on his device and went back to his snack. Venetia called a few weeks later to tell us Carl had moved to another state. She'd found out from her cousin who worked at the post office when Carl filed a change of address form. The other parents and I started a Facebook group to track where he went. Someone's brother-in-law saw him driving for a delivery company 2 states over. We sent his conviction records to the company but never heard back. At least he wasn't near kids anymore. Noah's teacher pulled me aside during pickup one day to show me something amazing. She'd recorded Noah using his device to help another nonverbal kid learn the sign for bathroom. He was showing the younger boy over and over, being so patient. She said he'd been doing this every day, teaching the other kids his signs and helping them use their devices. The little boy's mom found me in the parking lot crying and hugging me because her son had communicated a need for the first time. Nathaniel and I started going to counseling together after I found him crying in the garage one night. The counselor helped us realize we'd been so focused on Noah that we'd stopped talking to each other about anything else. We started having coffee together every morning before Noah woke up, just 15 minutes to check in with each other. It made such a difference. Nathaniel stopped working late and I stopped snapping at him about little things. We even went on a date for the first time in months while my sister watched Noah. Almost exactly 1 year after everything happened, I watched Noah climb onto the small bus with Ruben. He sat right in the front seat and waved at me through the window. Ruben had worked with him for months, first just sitting on the parked bus, then short drives around the block. Noah typed, "Friend Ruben," on his device every morning when the bus arrived. He rode all the way to the school and back without any problems. I ugly cried in the driveway after the bus left. Nathaniel took the morning off work to watch with me. We sat on the porch steps drinking coffee and not saying anything because there wasn't anything to say. Our baby was riding the bus again. Sabina helped us set up a nonprofit foundation to help other families dealing with school transportation problems. We named it Noah's Voice even though Noah typed, "That was a silly name." Emilio joined our board along with 3 other parents from our support group. We'd already helped 12 families in nearby districts file complaints and get their kids proper transportation. The lawyer who helped us incorporate said we were the first organization like this in the state. We had our first fundraiser at the community center and raised enough to hire a part-time advocate. One evening, Noah was playing with his device when he called me over. He'd typed out a whole message without any prompting. "Bad people exist, but more good people help. Speak your way." I asked if I could print it, and he nodded. Nathaniel found a frame at the store and we hung it in the living room next to his school pictures. Every morning, Noah touches it on his way to breakfast. Sometimes visitors ask about it and we tell them the whole story. Noah usually types, "Carl bad, Ruben good," and goes back to whatever he was doing. The frame is getting smudgy from his fingerprints, but I never clean it. Those fingerprints mean he made it through everything and came out stronger. That's worth more than a clean picture frame. Thanks for hanging out with me through this whole story. Hope my random questions didn't get too annoying along the way. Until we cross paths again, take care. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.